The planet Ocularis was known as the cradle of the heart. It was a world where biology had taken a different path, one of radical empathy. The Vora, the native inhabitants, did not communicate with sounds or symbols. They communicated through the direct transmission of neurochemical signatures. To a Vora, to see another was to feel another. They lived in a perfect, harmonious web of shared emotion. If one was hungry, the village felt the pang. If one was joyful, the valley sang with a collective euphoria. But this empathy was also their greatest weapon. In war, the Vora were invincible. They didn't need shields or high-tech armor. When an invader landed, the Vora would simply open their minds. They would project a massive, overwhelming wave of the Vora's own ancestral trauma, or better yet, they would amplify the invader's own hidden fears. A soldier would lift his rifle, and suddenly he would be hit by the crushing grief of a lost child he hadn't thought of in years. He would feel the absolute, paralyzing terror of 1,000 deaths. Most invaders didn't even fire a shot. They simply collapsed in fetal positions, weeping, or they turned their weapons on themselves to make the feeling stop. The Vora called it the mercy of the mirror. When the Soul Defense Initiative identified Ocularis as a primary source for cerebrocrystals, the only material capable of stabilizing long-range warp gates, they knew they couldn't send standard infantry. They had watched the records of the Caloran Empire's failed invasion. 10,000 elite warriors had landed on Ocularis, and 10,000 screams had echoed across the comms for 3 hours before total silence. The Calorans, a species of high honor and deep emotion, were the perfect prey for the Vora. The humans, however, had a different plan. They didn't send heroes. They didn't send brave men. They sent the static walkers. Major Silas Vance stood in the preparation chamber of the Hollow Point, a stealth destroyer hanging in the dark shadow of Ocularis's moon. Around him stood 50 men and women, each one connected to a rhythmic neural pacer. These weren't just soldiers, they were the results of 20 years of psychological conditioning. They had been trained to compartmentalize their consciousness until their limbic system, the part of the brain that processes emotion, was effectively offline during combat. "Check your pulses," Vance said. His voice was flat, devoid of the gravelly warmth usually found in a commander. It sounded like a recording, synchronized to the metronome. Inside their helmets, a steady, low-frequency click began to sound. Click, 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 60 beats per minute. This was the metronome. The soldiers began to breathe in time with the sound. They weren't thinking about their families. They weren't thinking about the glory of Earth. They were performing a mental exercise known as the industrial loop. They were visualizing a factory belt. They were counting the teeth on a gear. They were reciting the decimals of pi. They were turning their minds into dead, rhythmic static. The Vora High Empath, Kala, stood at the center of the great spire as the human dropships descended. He sensed them long before they hit the atmosphere. But he didn't sense minds. Usually, an invasion felt like a burning fire of aggression and fear. But this felt like a void. It felt like the cold, empty space between the stars was suddenly moving toward him. "Prepare the wave," Kala commanded his circle of empaths. "They bring a coldness. We shall melt them with the fire of 1,000 sorrows. We shall remind them what it means to feel." The dropships slammed into the iridescent soil of Ocularis. The ramps fell and the static walkers stepped out. They didn't take cover. They didn't scan the horizon with frantic eyes. They walked in a perfect geometric phalanx, their heavy boots thudding in unison with the metronome. Thud, thud, thud. 60 beats per minute. Kala unleashed the wave. It was a psychic tsunami of pure, unadulterated agony, the collective memory of the Vora's greatest plague. It was enough to stop the heart of a whale. It hit the human line with a visible ripple in the air, purple energy washing over the black armor. Major Vance felt it. Deep in the basement of his mind, a spark of sadness flickered. He saw a brief flash of a gray rainy day, a sense of loneliness. But the metronome was louder. Click. 3.14. Click. 159. Click. 265. The emotion had nowhere to land. There was no hook in his mind to catch the grief. His consciousness was moving too fast in a repetitive circle of logic. To the psychic wave, Vance's mind didn't look like a person. It looked like a malfunctioning computer. Advancing, Vance said into the comms. "Contact at 300 meters. Engaging." The humans raised their rifles. They weren't using plasma or fire. They were using high-velocity flechette rounds, silent, needle-like projectiles. They fired in a rhythmic pattern, echoing the metronome. Thud thud, thud thud. Every shot was a calculated subtraction of an obstacle. They didn't hate the Vora. They didn't fear them. To the static walkers, the Vora were simply biological variables that needed to be neutralized to reach the objective. Kala reeled back, his eyes bleeding blue ichor. What are they? I cannot find them. There is no fear to feed on. There is only noise. A terrible gray noise. The Vora empaths tried a different tactic. They projected submission bliss. A wave of intense, drug-like euphoria designed to make the soldiers drop their weapons in a state of peaceful ecstasy. The air turned to shimmering gold. The smell of jasmine and home filled the soldiers' filters. Inside Vance's head, a surge of dopamine tried to take hold. For a split second he wanted to smile. He wanted to lie down in the purple grass. But his neural dampener detected the chemical spike and sent a sharp, agonizing electrical jolt directly into his spine. The pain wasn't an emotion, it was a physical signal. It reset the loop. Loop compromised. Repacing, Vance muttered. He didn't get angry at the jolt. He didn't get happy that he survived. He simply adjusted his grip. Sector 2 clear. Moving to the spire. The humans entered the crystalline city. The Vora were everywhere, their faces twisted in confusion and terror. They were used to their enemies being part of the great song. They were used to the harmony of war. But the humans were silent. Not just with their mouths but with their souls. They moved through the streets like a row of automated harvesters in a wheat field. A Vora warrior, desperate and weeping, lunged at Vance with a crystal blade. He wasn't trying to kill the human, he was trying to connect, to force Vance to feel the terror of the moment. He screamed as he struck. Vance didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the alien's face. He stepped to the side with a calculated efficiency, caught the alien's arm and snapped it. He did it with the same emotional intensity a man might use to snap a dry twig for a fire. Then he moved on. He didn't deliver a mercy kill. He didn't show cruelty. He simply moved to the next coordinate on his map. This is the static soul. Humans are the only species in the galaxy that can voluntarily turn off their humanity to achieve a goal. We are the architects of the cold focus. We have spent centuries working in factories, sitting at assembly lines and staring at spreadsheets until the world around us vanishes. We know how to become the machine. Vance reached the great spire. He stepped into the central chamber where Kala and the high empaths were gathered. The room was a vortex of psychic energy, the air humming with the desperate, frantic emotions of an entire race. It was a storm of love, hate, fear, and sorrow, all swirling in a last attempt to break the invaders. Vance walked to the center of the room. He looked at Kala. Behind his visor, Vance's eyes were blank, focused only on the cerebrocrystal pulsing in the pedestal behind the alien. Please, Kala projected, the message a raw, bleeding wound of sound in the mind. Why do you do this? We feel your world. We feel the darkness you bring. How can you live in such silence? Does it not hurt to be so alone? Vance paused. He looked at the alien. For a moment, the metronome slowed. He thought about the answer. He thought about the millions of humans back on Earth, living their messy, emotional lives. He thought about the fact that he was here so they could stay there. It doesn't hurt, Vance said, his voice a flat, mechanical drone. It's just work. Vance raised his weapon and fired. He didn't kill Kala out of malice. He killed him because Kala was standing in front of the crystal. It was a matter of logistics. The high empath fell, and with his death, the great song of Ocularis shattered. The silence of soul descended upon the planet. The psychic web that had held the Vora together for millions of years was torn apart, replaced by the rhythmic, industrial thud of human boots. Within hours, the soul extraction core landed. They didn't care about the iridescent beauty of the city or the musical nature of the Vora's history. They brought in the static crushers, huge, vibrating drills that matched the frequency of the cerebrocrystals. They began to dismantle the spire block by block. The Vora were left wandering their own streets, their minds echoing with a terrible, hollow emptiness. They looked at the humans and saw something more terrifying than any monster. They saw a species that could look at a living, feeling soul and see only a variable. The Galactic Council's entry on the Ocularis campaign was a chilling warning of the static threat. Advisory: do not attempt psionic or empathic manipulation against focus-conditioned human units. While humans are naturally a highly emotional and chaotic species, they possess a terrifying capacity for neural rhythmic pacing. They can create a state of internal static that renders them invisible to psionic detection and immune to empathic distress. In this state, they do not possess a soul in the traditional sense. They are biological automata driven by a singular objective. Against the static walkers, your emotions are your greatest weakness. They will not feel your pain. They will only hear the metronome. Humanity had proven the ultimate industrial HFY truth. The heart is a powerful thing, but the mind, when narrowed to a single cold point of focus, is an unstoppable force. We are the ones who can turn off the light. We are the ones who can walk through the scream. And in the end, the most powerful song in the galaxy is no match for the sound of a human just doing his job. This has been Apex Sci-Fi. Keep the rhythm. If you enjoyed this cold, calculated conquest of the empathic world, hit that like button. Comment below. Could you turn off your emotions if it meant winning a war? Subscribe for the next conquest of Saga 9, the Thermal Phantoms. The spire is down. The crystals are ours.